Let me start this report by saying that you should never, under any circumstances, take 28 milligrams or anything close to 28 milligrams of 25I-NBOMe. Fatal overdoses have been reported with several times less, and although other drugs or allergic reactions may or may not have been involved in those cases, 25I-NBOMe is a potentially dangerous drug if used in excess. 28 milligrams is excess. Very little is known about this drug, and while I am able to enjoy it today in safe doses, it should not be taken lightly. This trip was not intentional. A few years back, I had a bit of an opiate habit that had been eating away at my wallet. My drug of choice was hydromorphone, and my preferred ROA was IV. Hydromorphone is hard to come by in my area, and prices are quite high for it, so I started experimenting with other opiates whenever they were cheaper. I had experimented with hydrocodone, diamorphine, tramadol, fentanyl, and codeine briefly, and my dealer told me one day that he had some Oxycontin. Having never tried this, I purchased just under 30 milligrams from him. He told me the pills had gotten crushed and had lost a little weight, which was no problem to me since he offered it to me at a very cheap price. The powder, which was very fine, was 28 milligrams. It seemed odd that the pill had been uniformly crushed into a fine powder, but I didn't think too much of it. At the time, I had just run out of needles and I wasn't going to get any more until my next package came in the mail, so I asked about snorting it. The dealer said it would work fine, so I went home and prepared 2 small lines, one for each nostril. Snorting the first line felt like I had been kicked by a mule in the brain, but being convinced that I'd be in an opiate-induced state of euphoria and warmth in just a few moments, I snorted the other line, experiencing the same level of agony as the first. Within 2 minutes, I started to notice euphoria, a rush of energy, and mild hallucinations, similar to taking a few tabs of LSD. My vision began to pulse in a strobe-like fashion, shifting and floating around. I could feel the energy of every object around me, and I knew the location of everything in the room without even looking around. The doorknob particularly fascinated me. It had turned into a spring-like shape and expanded and contracted across the room, creating a heavily ringing sound as it did so. My hookah, which was not packed or lit at the time, appeared to have smoke pouring out the hose. The smoke approached my face slowly, and once it hit me, it exploded into light. I believe this was due to the hookah sitting under the light in my apartment. The smoke may have been a warped hallucination of the light, but I am not sure. These hallucinations all greatly excited me as a fairly inexperienced drug user. I had no idea that an opiate could make you trip. After another 2 minutes, I realized that what I had taken was not an opiate. My heart was pounding and I was starting to sweat. My body started to jerk slightly at various points every few seconds. Worried that I was having a bad trip, my first priority was to take a Xanax or 2 and then make it to my bed to lay down. Neither of these goals were accomplished. Upon standing up from the couch where I'd snorted the Oxycontin, I became dizzy and closed my eyes for a second. This is where the trip got really crazy. I have never in my entire life experienced closed-eye visuals as intense as that moment. Fractal patterns easily surpassing the ones from DMT flew past the inside of my eyelids. As the visuals moved towards and over me, I could feel wind blowing over my entire body. The wind turned into vibrations, which turned into music. I'd experienced auditory hallucinations on 25 hits of LSD IV'd before. I do not recommend this unless you are positive that you are physically and mentally ready for it, but I had only noticed fleeting ambient sounds. These, however, were full-blown songs. Multiple instruments playing, lyrics being sung by sirens and languages from other dimensions, polyrhythms, choruses, verses, everything. It was incredible. I saw colors that do not exist outline my own mind and thoughts in the form of molecular structures and hieroglyphics. I lost all sense of smell and emotion, and I remained still for what felt literally like years. I stood there and existed. I was no longer human. I was time and energy. The next thing I knew, I was on the floor, rolling around and moving uncontrollably. At first I thought I was laughing, but I quickly realized that I was in a seizure. Brief terror set in as I realized that I was going to die. I tried to close my eyes, deciding to try to enjoy my final moments as best as possible. I couldn't feel my body, and I couldn't tell if I was breathing or not. I began to think of all the mistakes I had made in my life, but I somehow was able to remind myself that thinking about negative things is an easy way to trigger a bad trip. Aside from the seizure and potential death, the trip was quite enjoyable, even mid-seizure. and I guess somehow, subconsciously, my brain decided that if I was going to die, I'd at least die having somewhat of a good time. I think about this part of the trip the most, as it sticks out to me more than anything else. I had accepted that I was about to die, or at least I thought, as I wasn't entirely sure what drug I had taken, and I still was able to stay calm and focus on positive things. I always assumed that overdosing on a psychedelic would be a surefire way to experience a bad trip, but the euphoria I was experiencing even in that moment overwhelmed any brief spurts of fear or anxiety. I thought about my childhood friend, who will be referred to with a fake name as Mila to maintain anonymity, who I had always been close to, and hoped that she would handle the news of my death well. 2 weeks later, although it felt like no time had passed at all, I awoke in the hospital in the ICU. I remember seeing Mila, and I remember asking her how she had died as well. I did not realize I was in the hospital and thought we had both ended up in some sort of spiritual limbo. I do not remember what she said to me. I, according to Mila, fell asleep mid-sentence. Mila and my nurses stated that I awoke 3 more times, none of which I remember, and said that I had woken up for a few seconds before the first time I remember waking up as well. The next memory I have was of my catheter being taken out. I did not feel it at all, which seemed strange, until the nurse explained that I was heavily sedated. She explained that I had been placed in a medically induced coma. This sounded good to me, and I went back to sleep without asking any questions. My memory is fairly foggy after that, which seems odd since my next memories came a fair bit after coming out of a coma, but my first few memories were closer to the coma and seemed clearer. Over the course of a few days, it was explained to me that Mila had come over to my house to see if I was home and heard signs of a struggle inside. Mila has a key to my house, and when she came in, she immediately called an ambulance and provided CPR and rescue breathing while stabilizing my head until the paramedics arrived. I was almost immediately placed into a coma so my body could stabilize, and at one point, I was not expected to come out of it. Thankfully, I recovered almost fully. I have a small twitch in my neck, I heavily damaged my sense of smell, which is not expected to ever recover, and I suffered a concussion when I fell over. I went into cardiac arrest, suffered minor brain damage, and suffered from short-term memory loss for several months while I recovered both in and eventually outside of the hospital. I experienced very minor but consistent symptoms of HPPD to this day, well over a year later. My doctors are unsure if it will go away within the foreseeable future, but I do not mind it. After hearing that I had been hospitalized, the dealer contacted Mila and told her what substance I had taken. This information helped the doctors and could have saved my life. Sometime after hearing that I had been placed in a coma, the dealer who sold me the 25I-NBOMe as Oxycontin turned himself into the police. He is on parole now and has stopped both dealing and using drugs. He offered to pay all of my medical bills, won't let me pay for dinner, and despite who he used to be, he is now the most selfless, kind, and thoughtful human being that I have ever known. I have accepted his apologies, I hold no grudges against him, and we are close friends. He has asked me to be the best man at his wedding this winter. He has never forgiven himself for his actions, and he admitted that he did it just to offload the 25I-NBOMe since he had nobody interested in buying it. I hope that one day he will be ready to forgive himself, and I will be there for him when he does. For anybody out there thinking of selling research chemicals or any substance as another drug, think twice. It may haunt you for the rest of your life, even after others have forgiven you. I have done 25I-NBOMe in normal to highish doses since then, from 500 micrograms to 6 milligrams after waiting a year to try it again. I have had nothing but wonderful experiences, and it is in my top 3 favorite drugs. I now prefer it even over LSD due to the energy boost it gives me. On an interesting side note, I had no interest in opiates after this trip. I tried to stop using them before the trip with brief success, but relapse always occurred. I've tried them a few times, but they just aren't enjoyable to me. I definitely feel the effects, but the effects from opiates are no longer what I prefer. I enjoy psychedelics on a casual basis, but not much else, not even cannabis really. I do not recommend taking this substance in any level purely to quit another substance. Therapy, rehabilitation, and medical assistance from licensed physicians is the only method I recommend for quitting any drug. Be safe and have fun out there. Both of my parents are pharmacists, so I have access to any drug I want. That encouraged me to try different drugs even if they're not famous to cause a buzz or a psychedelic experience. One of the drugs that I tried was Chemidrin. Scientific name is Procyclic HCl. It's used to treat Parkinson's, so the first time I tried it at a low dose, I expected that the change won't be mental, but rather physical, and I was right. I soon entered a vegetative state after taking 20 milligrams of the drug. This was my experience with the drug though, which went on rather smoothly and safely. The second time I used it was a different story. Although I didn't crave for the drug after that time, I actually almost forgot all about it. But one day, I was in the pharmacy and it was the only thing I could lay my hand on, and so I took 10 tablets, 5 milligrams each. That day I was to hook up with a friend of mine to get drunk, and I did. But before I got into his car, I swallowed all the 10 pills at once without him noticing. We drank beer in his car while he was driving. Within an hour, I drank 5 bottles of beer. That first hour was confusing because I was dancing and drinking, and I didn't really know if what I was feeling was caused by the alcohol or the drug. I can't even clearly remember how I was feeling. I guess I was feeling good. Then it hit me. I started to lose control of my limbs. I could barely move them. I laid back and everything around me moved slowly. My friend thought I was just tired from all the dancing and yelling, so he kept driving, drunk, and that wasn't helping. My throat and mouth felt extremely dry. I lost sensation of my tongue and I tried to bite it, but all I felt was something under my teeth. I didn't bite harder because I was worried I'd cut it without noticing. My heart started to beat in a way so weird, very loud, beating very fast. Then all of a sudden, it stops for a second or two, then beats fast again. Breathing became very difficult. I actually had to put all the effort I had left to inhale and exhale. This is what happened to me physically, but as to my concentration level and awareness of what was going out, it was almost non-existent. All I can remember is the loud music, my drunk friend driving so fast, and lights leaving trails. All this happened during the second hour. My friend finally noticed that I was in a vegetative state for a while and asked me what's wrong, and I confessed that I took the pills because I felt like I was about to die. Too bad my tongue wasn't working, which freaked the fuck out of him, so I had to repeat several times in order for him to understand. He didn't take me to a hospital though. He took me to a nearby friend's apartment and helped me to throw up. I did. I felt much better after throwing up. Although I could barely walk or feel my limbs, what felt good is that my heart started to beat in a more organized manner, breathing felt easier, and I had some sensation back to my tongue. He got me some milk, and when I felt a little better, I looked at the clock and realized it has been 7 hours since I took the pills. My memory of what happened is almost gone. I was concentrated on my fear, and my surroundings seemed vague and not important at the time. My friend drove me back home. It was about 1 in the morning. I thought that everything will be back to normal now. All I have to do is fall asleep and wake up a healthy person in the morning. I was wrong. I couldn't even sleep. I was half awake, half asleep the whole time, having the weirdest dreams which felt so realistic. Finally, at 7 a.m., I moved out of my bed and looked in the mirror. My pupils were unequal in size and my eyes were yellow. I knew it was a liver problem. I started the computer, but it was pointless because I was unable to read any word. Concentrating on anything was impossible. Back then, when I had an idea running through my mind, it vanishes seconds later. I couldn't finish a sentence. It's just like the feeling I get when I open the fridge door and wonder why am I here. Still, I was somehow happy. My limbs, tongue, heart, and lungs were all functioning well, and that was a good satisfaction. I called the same friend and he came and took me from my house because I didn't want my parents to know that there was something wrong. That day was horrible too, but by night, my vision was improved, and within 3 days, the yellow color in my eyes almost disappeared. The lesson is, don't overdose on any drug, it's not fun at all, and don't mix drugs with alcohol unless you know for sure that it's harmless. Please be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, and comment down below your near-death experience. I'd love to hear it. Alright, let's move on to the next story.
Ozzy, get out of here.
The mood before I inhaled the Carbogen was lighthearted. A friend was dispensing the gas, another joined me to watch, and the person who had brought the tank was an acquaintance whom I had met several times. The atmosphere was jovial, with humorous quips going around the room about how a couple of psychonauts before me were each supposed to be the 13th person to take the gas, but that they had died during their sessions, and hence experience reports could not be filled out, so now I would be considered number 13. Of course, no one had really died. Before the gas was turned on, I was asked to take a breath with the mask held to my face so that I could sense what it felt like when the hose was correctly sealed on without any leaks. As the hose had very little air in it, it was difficult to breathe, which resulted in a brief panicky feeling of not being able to get any air, but this did allow me to understand how the mask was supposed to properly fit. The regulator to the Carbogen tank was then turned on, and I counted along for the first 8 breaths. Unlike what others had reported, I didn't get a sense from those first breaths that it was hard to breathe. I had closed my eyes at the start of the experience, and after the initial 8 breaths, I noticed superimposed onto the dark field behind my eyelids a collection of pink dots, each about the size of a quarter. They first appeared in the center of my vision, slowly multiplied, brightened, and began to spiral clockwise. A warm relaxation similar to what I get from nitrous oxide began to wash over me. I stopped counting my breaths, but I did not get a sense that I lost consciousness at any point during the experience. I remembered who I was, that I was having a Carbogen trip, and that I should pay attention to the phenomenology of the experience in order to bring back a description of it. Visually, the only thing that was happening with eyes closed were these streaking pinkish lines of light, swirling and pulsing in a clockwise direction. At some point, I found it increasingly hard to breathe. I felt as though I was not getting enough air, and my breathing became more rapid. My heart rate increased, and the labored breathing became quite painful. It reminded me of when I was a kid and I would run as fast as I could for as long as I could until I finally fell to the ground, legs burning, heart pounding, lungs gasping. However, as a kid when the running stopped, eventually, I started to feel better, with my heartbeat and breathing perceptibly slowing down in stages. In this situation, there was no relief. Then, I noticed that the mask was being removed. With eyes open, material reality appeared as a smeared pinwheel of color. It was as if the external world was a pie cut into 6 pieces, spinning clockwise, and 5 of the slices were comprised of swirling blobs of colorful shapes, but the 6th piece was a window into what solid reality looked like. There was a strong tension between the blurred, disembodied realm of indistinct color and the formed material world of discrete objects. It took a massive, even a painful amount of focused energy to keep the material world filled with unique, distinct, individual forms. Within the reality slice, I could tell that the others in the room had become concerned about my well-being. I saw their faces peering down at me, and it felt as if they were trying to get my attention, trying to pull me back into their realm. It was clear they were very upset, and it seemed like they were fighting with me to pull me out of the non-material place where I was stuck. The transition back into their realm was extremely unpleasant. Imagine what it might feel like if you were a 2-dimensional being forced into a 3-dimensional form, whisper-thin flattened taffy being stretched and plumped back into a clay golem. Suddenly, a new face appeared, looking down at me. I recognized it as belonging to a physician whom I had met earlier that night. For a couple spins of the pie cycle, he was present, then he was gone. His face lacked the sense of concern that I saw in the other faces. The struggle between existing as a disembodied consciousness and an embodied form seemed almost beyond endurance. In some ways, I felt as I imagine a drowning man might feel after being pulled from a lake and brought back to life. My heart was pounding, I was gasping for air. I felt like crap, awash with the panicky feeling that no matter how hard I breathed, I wasn't pulling in enough oxygen. Gradually, the slices of pie featuring solid, non-smeared reality began to increase. 2 out of 6, 3 out of 6, then more, rapidly 4 and 5 out of 6. Several minutes passed before I began to feel as though I was getting enough oxygen and my heartbeat was slowing down. A few more minutes passed before I could really register the looks of extreme worry around me. Based on the faces of those in the room, I could tell that what I went through had not been a typical reaction. Eventually, I got closer and closer to a baseline state of consciousness. What had happened to get my friend so worked up? At no point during the experience did I notice losing consciousness. Also, at no point did I believe that I had stopped breathing. Indeed, in my mind, I had been gasping for air. However, according to those in the room, I did stop breathing around my 27th or 28th breath of Carbogen. Concerned about my condition, the friend administering the gas removed the mask around what would have been breath 30. I had been thrashing about in a manner described to me as being somewhat seizure-like, banging my arm into the wall next to the couch. When the mask came off, my lips were pressed together and turning blue from lack of oxygen. One of the sitters forced my mouth open and began mouth-to-mouth resuscitation. Another left to get the physician from the adjacent room. But in the short time before he arrived, I had begun to breathe again. After I was breathing normally, I felt super bad about having worried my friends so much, and I also felt grateful that they had got me breathing again. Similarly, they felt somewhat bad about having made jokes related to other people dying before I began the Carbogen session, along with the fact that my trip could literally be described in some manner as a near-death experience. The feeling of struggle between a disembodied two-dimensional realm and the material world also felt quite a bit like I might imagine re-entry from a near-death experience would feel. Back at the party, I also regretted that my trip had put a damper on the enthusiasm of some who had not yet had their turn with the tank. One of the sitters had to take a break to process his part in my experience, and at least a couple of people decided against breathing Carbogen, choosing to head home instead. My wife was livid with me for participating in an activity that appeared to have had the unexpected risk of death. She had no interest in taking Carbogen herself and just came along to visit with friends and spend time with me. "How would I explain to our child that you died in some stupid drug experiment?" she demanded. My lungs still ached from the experience, and there was a horrible stabbing pain in them when I coughed. This diminished over a couple of days. About 30 to 60 minutes after the experience, I also became aware that my tongue hurt. A few hours later, when I looked in the mirror, I noticed what looked like a large bloody cold sore. I may have bit my tongue when I was banging around, or perhaps Carbogen's alteration of the acid-alkaline levels of my blood contributed to my getting a cold sore. I don't normally get them, and one other participant later reported having gotten a cold sore. A few months after my Carbogen experience, I attended another event at which the physician who had checked in on me was also present. In conversation, I discovered that the work he does is with people who have been brought into an emergency room in critical condition. His patients will often not be leaving the hospital alive. He wanted to hear about my Carbogen experience and asked whether I remembered him coming in to check on me. I described the experience to him as I have told it above. He let me know that, despite his apparent lack of concern, he actually had been very worried about me. He left me with the impression that it might be valid to consider my trip as a near-death experience. He said that his unconcerned mannerism was an approach that he purposefully took in order to calm down the people sitting with me, who were stressed out about what was happening. Although I am mildly tempted to revisit Carbogen in a much lower dose range, say 8 breaths, that intellectual curiosity has been overridden by my sense of leaving things well enough alone. Even though the trip was not pleasant, it was educational. It provided a memorable first-hand experience of how things can unexpectedly go wrong. It reinforced the importance of having one or more sitters present, particularly when taking a new drug, and I felt lucky that one of the party guests was an MD. Finally, it inspired me to enroll in a CPR class, which I recently completed. Just to show where my tolerance level was by the time this night had come about, I would say that I have an extremely high tolerance compared to most. This all started at age 15 with the basic Tylenol with codeine pills. Over the years, I always found a way to come across oxycodone pills, be it by faking an injury or actually getting hurt playing sports. This latest binge was about 7 steady months using roxycodone pills. The first month, January, I had a housewarming party at my new place, and a friend of mine, who will be A from here on out, brought me a few 30mg pills. I banged, snorted, all 3, and I knew I was in love with them. So much smaller than Percocets and so much less powder to snort. Fast forward about 7 months to the end of June, and I am now up to 7, maybe 8 30mg pills a day, so on average about 240mg a day. Here were days I did up to 12. This is where things go terribly wrong. In addition to obtaining these 30mg pills with A, I was being treated for a genuine back injury and prescribed 120 10mg oxycodone pills a month. In trying to get the doc to write me something stronger, she changed my medication to Opana ER 20mg. I had no idea how strong this medication was, but I have seen comparisons stating that it is 6 to 8 times stronger than morphine, milligram to milligram. Who knows? Anyway, I fill the script and bang the first one as soon as I get in the car. I get home and bang another, and a half hour later I do another. Now I am at about 60mg, and I'm rocked. But for some reason this opiate gave me cravings for more than any other opiate. I oblige the cravings and do another. At this time, my cousin, Jay, picks me up to go play poker at his house. I did another 2 that I remember, 120mg. I can't keep my eyes open, let alone play cards. I remember everyone getting pissed and my cousin took me home. The last thing I remember was getting inside, using the bathroom, and getting in bed with my girlfriend. I wake up, tied to the gurney, in an ambulance. I guess at this point they shot me with Narcan and I woke up. I was puking everywhere, then blackness again. I wake up another time in the ER. I puked. I notice all of my family still in their pajamas. I think, this can't be good. The next thing I hear is a nurse or doctor. His kidneys are failing. He's going into cardiac arrest. From there, everything went black, and all I could hear was the machine breathing for me. I can hear, but I can't move. I can't wake up. The next time I open up my eyes, there's family all around me. I'm told it is 2 days later, and I've been in a coma for over 56 hours. I later come to find out that I had aspirated into my lungs and caused sepsis in my body. My lungs filled with fluid, and my kidneys began to fail. When your kidneys fail, they don't filter out the potassium in your body, sending you into cardiac arrest. Basically, everyone I know came to pay their last respects over those 56 hours. My family was told I most likely was not going to wake up. I ended up in the ICU for 2 weeks on extremely rough antibiotics to help clean my body of the sepsis. I just really wanted to let people know how strong this medication really is. I took it for granted that I knew my limits and went so long without incident. Opana is strong. That extended release form snuck up on me. If I stopped at 40 or 60 milligrams, I would not have become a statistic. Just days prior to this night, I would take 3 or even 4 OC80s without an issue. I'd even go out and function on them. But only 120 milligrams of this drug nearly killed me. If my alarm didn't go off and wake up my girlfriend, I'd have been dead. I am in no position to judge anyone. I still struggle myself. But if you can't do it alone, help is out there. Suboxone is a great drug to help with opiate addiction. Good luck, everyone.